Right. Good afternoon. My name is Sudhi Ramamurthy. I'm a program manager in the Office developer team at Microsoft. And I'm really glad that I'm having an opportunity to come and talk about this. And I'm not sure if you had attended any of this in the last year or the build. We covered very similar topics. So if you've already attended them, this may be some of repetition for you. So the topic of today's discussion is going to be Office add-ins and Microsoft Graph as it relates to Excel. So I know Excel has been one of the core themes of this conference. So a lot of powerful apps and services being showcased, a lot of different ways in which you can extend and interact with this product. So what I'm going to talk about today is from a developer point of view. How can you extend on top of Excel? And the other thing I would stress is that a lot of things I'm going to talk about here also applies to the other Office apps and services for things like Word and OneNote and PowerPoint and so on. I'll point out the places where Excel is slightly different, but in majority of the cases, so you can extend very similar patterns for other Office apps and services as well. So just a show of hands, so I kind of have a little bit of context. How many of you consider yourself developer or IT related role? Okay, quite a bit. And have you interacted with any of the Office add-in or Microsoft Graph related technologies or services? Okay, that's good. That's good to know. So the agenda for today is kind of broadly in these three categories. So first, I want to give some overview of the Office developer platform. So what does it mean when we say Office 365, and how does it relate to developers, and why should you care? Maybe you're a developer providing third-party services, or maybe you're extending your enterprise applications. So why should this matter to you? And secondly, for Excel specifically, there are sort of two broad themes. One is integrating Microsoft Graph using Excel, and then secondly and thirdly, the Office add-ins, and how can you use Excel Office add-ins as part of the overall Office platform. And in a lot of ways, you can think of Microsoft Graph and Office add-ins as sort of distinct from each other, but the way things are moving and the way we see the future, we see there's a lot of correlation between the two. So there's a lot of benefit in kind of understanding how these two can fit together. But also you can think of them as two distinct things. So I'll point out along the way when I'm showcasing the demos and some of the other slides and how they're different and how they're similar. Along the way, I will showcase some of the resources and how you can engage and participate. And I think there's a Q&A at the end of the session, but feel free to stop at any time if you have any questions. So before I start, I want to frame the discussion on Office 365. So when you think of Office 365, you think of great apps and services that we provide as part of the suite, the cloud suite, that lets you interact with your coworkers. We can author. You can communicate using mail and chat services. You have authoring services such as OneDrive, SharePoint, and Dull, where you're creating and managing the content. And we also have sort of analytics built on top of it. Sort of underpinning all of this is the Office 365 groups, which is a way of organizing your work environment, providing structure to how the users are organized, how they're given access to how they collaborate with each other. Microsoft Graph is a fairly new addition to it, which is how do you allow these applications to interact on top of a service layer. So it allows both first-party and third-party enhancements on top of the same applications and services at the Office 365 Office. And in addition, it's the security and compliance frameworks that is underpinning all of these services. So, so this is how sort of end user kind of thinks about Office 365. And I want to next talk about why should you as a developer care about this. So first and foremost, Office 365 is growing tremendously. So over 90% of the Fortune 500 companies are on Microsoft Cloud, and we hit 100 million monthly commercial active users. So that is from a usage point of view, simply from a user's point of view, there's a huge growth there. Along with that comes a huge opportunity. So as these users are collaborating and creating content, there's a tremendous amount of data being created in the work environment. Think of all the emails and the calendar invites, the files that are being generated, all the chat services that creates conversations. So all of this is potential for extending your services on top of it, gain more understanding on insights of this data. And along the way, we're also creating some intelligence on top of it. And this is Microsoft's effort of doing it. And there's another aspect of it, which is on top of this data and users, the third-party services and developer can also create their own intelligence on top of it. So these are sort of the three pillars that I'll hit upon when I talk about Graph as well. So think of the opportunities around these three aspects. So number of users, there's a huge opportunity there, and the data that's being created as part of the work environment, and also what kind of intelligence that you can provide on top of it, which is either extending on some of the inbuilt intelligence that we provide, but also making sense. Maybe it's your own algorithm, maybe it's your own service that helps the work environment go smoothly. So that's where the developer opportunity comes in. And from a developer point of view, you can kind of think about where can my services or apps run. So there are sort of two pillars to this. One is sort of Office Canvas. So Office Canvas is any place where users are engaged in some form of conversation or creating content or authoring an email. So that is the user experience side of things. And there's an opportunity to put your services inside this. So which means you may have a value enhancement that you can provide in addition to the inbuilt capabilities on these canvases. So you can make your solutions as part of these canvases. And secondly, you may have a standalone website or a mobile app or maybe a bot service that is hosted and developed separately. And you may want to provide some value-add services on top of the canvas itself. So this may be more offline scenarios where you have sort of combination of different workloads. You provide a unified view. And these are all part of the standalone web and developer services, device apps. And as part of this, you can also embed a canvas. An example is, say you have a website that provides some form of a service. And as part of the website, the workflow involves users to either view a document or maybe edit a document. Now you can embed the same canvas that you see in the rich applications as part of your website or a web application. So that's what we mean by embedded canvas. So all of these can interact with Microsoft Graph as well as your own cloud service. You may have your own a cloud function or another third-party web service that you rely on. All of these can actually interact with Microsoft Graph or any other web service to provide a unified service. So I'll stop here. If you have any questions, sort of this is making sense for you. All right, I'll proceed. So given that background, where does Excel fit into all of this, right? So when we think of programmability surface for Excel, there are broadly two categories. So one is sort of the web add-ins. So add-ins can be built on existing technologies such as VBA or COM services. But what I'm focusing today is sort of the web-based add-ins. So that's sort of one way in which you can extend Excel. The second way is to use the Microsoft Graph REST APIs. So these are sort of more cloud-friendly apps that actually can use Excel. So if you have a Excel file stored on your OneDrive, for instance, on the cloud, you can use the technology that we have to access, read, and write document into the workbook. So those are sort of two broad aspects. So first I'm going to talk about the REST API as a graph-based service. All right. So you may have heard about Microsoft Graph, and to me it's always a little bit of an overwhelming experience when I think of Graph because it is so huge and vast. And the way I tend to simplify this is to kind of think of them as sort of three different layers. So the first one is users. Work environment is centered around users, how they're organized, what kind of structure they're set up under. So think of them as users of profile. And Microsoft Graph gives you a single endpoint, a REST API-based endpoint, to gain information about users and profile. So here, if you're familiar with sort of REST API, on the right-hand side, I'm showing some of the sample query that you can make to Microsoft Graph. So one of them says, of all the users, give me information about username Sally. And it comes back with a list of response fields. And then you can gain a little bit more insight, such as, hey, in addition, give me photo, or give me information about the manager or the direct reports of this user. And you can also ask, hey, what are the groups that this user is part of? So these are just sample queries that's centered around users. What do they have access to? How are they organized? And how are they structured in a work environment? So that's one aspect. The second one is these users, like I mentioned before, are creating content. And they're part of a work environment. They're collaborating. They're engaged in conversations. They're creating their own sites and the files and so on. So Microsoft Graph also allows you to gain access to these content that they're producing. On the right-hand side, it has some samples around give me information about their drive. So drive is OneDrive. So what information do they have on OneDrive? The second query says, well, I know I have a Excel workbook, and given the ID, tell me a little bit more about the Excel workbook itself. And then you have messages, which is the emails, events, which is calendar invites. So as a user, I may have my own contacts. So give me all that information. So in addition, we recently introduced devices. That is still in beta. So that gives information about your devices as well. So, so as you can see, the same endpoint allows you to, based on a user, based on their profile, go kind of one level deeper, which is to access the content that they are producing. The third layer is the insights. And this is where there's a lot of opportunity for the developers to expand as well. We have some that is out of the box, and we are adding to this list as well. So given that you have profile of the users and the data that they're creating, what kind of insights can you gain out of it? Right? Because as is, this can be like huge ocean of data, but how can you make sense out of this? An example could be, what are the trending documents around a particular user or groups? Can you help me find the best meeting time given a set of users? What are some of the recent documents that the user has been viewing and interacting with? So these are some of the insights that you can gain by just making simple queries. So where does Excel fit in? So Excel is part of one of the underlying services that you see at the bottom. So in addition to users, groups, and calendar, Drive, and Teams, which was added recently to beta. So Excel, you can think of them as part of the overall workloads that supports Microsoft Graph. Specifically, the way it's structured is that given that Graph gives you a single endpoint based on REST and JSON and OAuth2 services, any workbook, any Excel file that is stored as part of OneDrive for Business or your SharePoint sites now can be accessed through the same interface. And what we allow you to do is to kind of boil down the workbook in terms of simple object relationship. Things like, hey, how many worksheets there are for each of the worksheets? Can you give me a set of tables and address any of the range that is part of the workbook? So all of these queries is possible through the single endpoint. And you don't necessarily have to have the user interacting with the document. The document could be residing on the OneDrive somewhere separately, and you can access this remotely. It can be maybe a nightly job that is running to gain information or set up templates. Maybe when the workflow ends, you want to pick up that workbook and feed that into another service. So all of these sort of built-in workflow actions can happen without the user actually being involved with that. So users can be interacting, collaborating from different places. But at the end of the day, you have a workbook that either you want to read data out of or you want to read data into. The other aspect is Excel is a very powerful calculations engine. So you may want to access the calculation engine service that is part of the workbook. Say you have a mortgage calculator, and it has complex formulas built into it. You don't want to recreate that logic in your web or mobile app. You may want to give an analyst control over what kind of formulas, business rule goes into it, into the workbook. So they own the sort of the engine, the calculation engine. But you as this end user service can say, well, I'm going to read data out of that, or I'm going to use the calculation engine that is part of the workbook remotely. So all of these patterns are available. So today we support this for any workbooks that is stored as part of SharePoint site. So any location in SharePoint site or OneDrive for Business, which is centered around a particular user, or modern groups. So modern groups, you can think of them as similar to SharePoint sites. And very soon we are going to expand this for OneDrive for Consumer. OneDrive for Consumer is interesting because pretty much anybody can have access to OneDrive for Consumer, because you can sign up for free or you can get extra storage by going up the tier. But the entry barrier for someone to gain access to OneDrive Consumer and store their files, Excel workbooks, is really low. So that means as a developer, you can say, in order for my add-in to work, the user needs to just have a OneDrive for Consumer, and then you can build your services on top of it. So at the bottom, it shows the resource path into a particular workbook. So at the beginning, you see the common endpoint, which is graph.microsoft.com, and there is a version. So we have two versions right now, the v1.0, which is the generally available version. There's also a beta endpoint, which is where most of the new features tend to surface. And then me just shows, tells the graph that, hey, this app is accessing the file in relation to this particular user, which means me as a user can authorize an application to act on my behalf. And then the drive gives me access to the OneDrive, OneDrive for Business, but you can also have, replace that with one of the SharePoint site. And then among the items, which is collection of all the files that I have, here's an ID of a workbook that I know. You can also substitute that with a path. Instead of item side, you can have a path there. And then the workbook, that gives me a collection of all the objects that are part of the workbook. So with that, I'm going to switch over to a couple of demos. So just to kind of cement both Microsoft Graph, what does it mean in practice, and then look at how can you extend Excel REST using simple application. All right. So all of this demos are centered around a user, and I have an account here as part of Office 365. And I have access to all these services. So part of them are OneDrive and SharePoint. So as far as Excel is concerned, these are the sort of the two apps that I'm going to be using for storing content. But before I go into Excel, I want to briefly kind of demonstrate what Graph allows you to do. So here's a tool. It's available through the developer Microsoft.com website. And when you go there, you'll see a Graph Explorer. So this is just a simple UI for you to help kind of get started. It comes with some of the prepackaged queries, as you can see. For instance, let's say I want to get my, I can click on this. It gives me my photo and gives me information about my manager. Maybe I need to sign in. Okay, I think since I'm the admin, I don't have a manager set up in this developer tenant. But yeah, so you can see it comes with prepackaged queries. So, and what you see at the top is the HTTP verb, which is part of how you construct the REST API. And here's the endpoint, and here is the query that's going against the graph. And I can kind of demonstrate how easy it is to work with it. Here's the Teams site. Here's a Teams application, Microsoft Teams. And Microsoft Teams allows teams to work together, collaborate, and can form groups and organize people and conversations around. So here I have 2 channels. I have a channel for general topics and one for status. I may want to create a new channel. So as part of the prepackaged service, you can select, you can turn on and off. I've selected Microsoft Teams as one of the ones that I'm interested in. So here I'm going to say, hey, tell me what are the teams that I'm part of. And it goes and does a query against the beta endpoint and says, give me all the teams that I'm part of. So all the, and it comes back with the response. The response comes back with a collection, which is an array of objects. And each one of them says, what are the different, the teams that I'm part of. So here's an ID. So here's an ID of the group. Now, as I showed here, this is the same group. I want to create a separate channel for this. So let's say I'll copy this ID. Sorry, my mouse is not working. And then I want to create a new channel. So here it says, in order to create a new channel, you need to tell me which group that I'm creating the channel on. So I'm going to substitute that here, and I'm going to the request body, and it has some prepackaged information already in here. So I'm going to create an architecture group. So I'm going to run this query, and it comes back and says, okay, here's the group that here's the channel that you just created, and here's the ID of the channel that I just created, right? And when I go back here, you can see that it just refreshed with the new channel that I created. So it just shows you how easy it is for you to use tools such as Graph Explorer for you to get started. Now, similarly, I can go on and create a new chat thread that says, in addition to creating the channel, as part of it, you may want to create a conversation. A conversation is something like, here's a conversation that people can start and reply and respond to. The same thing can be done here. The pattern here is that of the groups that I'm part of, substituting the group ID with the one that we just used and the channel that we just created, create a new thread, and you can kind of see and play around with this. So I just wanted to give you a place to go to get kind of initial understanding and play around with Microsoft Graph. So with that, I'm going to switch to another demo that showcases how can you use this for extending my Excel REST API. Now, here is the list of contacts that I have. It's the same user, and this user happens to have multiple contacts built into it. And I just have 7 contacts, but in reality, you may have hundreds of them. Now, you may want to export part of this to an Excel workbook, right? And you may want to apply some conditions or filters on top of it. In order to create a simple web app or a mobile app, all you need to do is really create any website that uses web technology. So here I have a React.js Node app running, a web application. It's running locally, as you can see here. but this could be any application that's hosted on the website. So it has sort of three distinct parts. So one is the login aspect. So as a developer, you would need to get authorization on behalf of the user. So that is the first part, which is to get users to sign in and allow them to act on your behalf. The second one it does is it goes and extracts the same contacts that I just showed. The third part, which is more interesting, is now given that you have those contacts, you may want to push that file to, you may want to push those set of contacts into an Excel workbook. So I'm going to begin by logging in. It is launching a dialog and asking me to provide the authorization. So this is using OAuth 2 framework. And once I authorize, it comes back and says, okay, now I have the necessary tokens for me to proceed further. So I'm going to go get the list of contacts. And these are the same contacts that we just saw here, but I just happen to extract a few fields such as email, phone, and address, the business contact information. Now, the next interesting part is now I want to export this contact to a workbook. So this is a workbook that is on my OneDrive for Business. So I have a, my OneDrive for Business, and I have a file here. And as part of this workflow, I want to export this to Excel. So I'm going to say, okay, go export this to a new worksheet. So what this is doing is opening that workbook on the server. So it opens up a server copy and pushes all the content into the workbook. It says it's done, so we're going to go over here and look at the new worksheet that just got created with the content that was just extracted out of another API for contacts. So what this is showing is that you can mix and match services. You can get information from one workload. In this case, I happen to show contacts. This could be any third-party service. This could be any data source that's out there, and it pushed it into the workbook, and users didn't even have to open the workbook. Let's briefly look at the code of how this looks like. I'm going to skip over the authorization piece. If you're interested, please come and talk to me after this session. But essentially, there's a standard way to get the authorization. And the next one is to go get the contacts. So here I'm making a call to contacts endpoint. And the next is if the file doesn't exist, it creates an empty file. In my case, I already had the file, so that's well and good. And the third one is the load contacts into Excel. So it does sort of different steps. So the first step is to create a persistent session, which is to say, okay, now I want to open this workbook. Once it opens the workbook, it creates a session. There's sort of a relationship between the application and the workbook. And then it creates a new worksheet, so which is basically a post action into a set of worksheets. And once it creates a worksheet, now it creates a table as part of the worksheet. And once it creates a table, it goes ahead and the contacts that it built in as part of the contacts API, it goes and adds those rows at the end of the table. So what you see at the end of the result is that the workbook gets updated. So this is a very simple interaction, simple pattern. But you may also want to extend this through more innovative ways. So one could be, how do you integrate with bot framework, right? Because at the end of the day, they're all communicating using REST APIs. Or this could be a combination of you have some interesting web functions. So you have some data analytics function. Given a set of data, it comes back with some amount of information, maybe a chart. So how can you integrate with that? So just to spark your idea, so I'm going to showcase one here, so which is an Excel bot. This is an open source project out there that we have that just showcases how do you make use of these unique patterns. So here I'm going to say hello to this, and I've already signed in. If not, it's going to help you sign into this. It says, okay, I have a session going on, and over here I have a file called loan calculation. So it has a set of information. It has some loan amount and breakout of information out there. Now, you want to interact with this. So I'm going to say, work with LoanCalc, which happens to be the file, and Excel will come back and say, the Excel bot is going to come back and say, okay, we already have the session going. I may want to ask, hey, show names. So these are named items that are part of the workbook, and it's going to come back showing set of names, right? So this is reading information from the workbook. So I might say show loan. Show me the loan amount. So it says it's $6,000. So I'm going to show, I'm going to update that to $8,000. So the bot is doing the work behind the scene and says, okay, now I updated it to $8,000. So when I go back here, edit this workbook, I should be able to see the loan amount being updated to the new one that I set over here. So you can also say show charts, and I believe this one has a single chart called chart 2, and then I can say show chart 2, and it's going to download the chart as an image and showcase this. So as you can see, this is a very simple interaction pattern for an end user. So you're having more of a conversation. So this is a layer that you're building on top of Excel workbook using Graph and any other form of technology that you may want to use. In this case, I happen to use Excel bot. All right, so hope that gives a little bit of information about using Microsoft Graph and any other form of intelligence service that you have, and integrating as Excel into your work environment. So next, I'm going to switch over into add-in. Before that, are there any questions that I can address? To the waffle? Yeah, so I think of the waffle as more of applications that are part of, for instance, I have Dynamics, Teams, and Flow, and so on, right? Graph is more of a API endpoint that cuts across all of these. So it's not going to open an application UI for you, but each one of them have some form of a UI associated. Graph doesn't have a UI. It's just basically an API endpoint. Yeah, so in order to go there, I have in my deck, which I believe it's going to be shared with the audience, I've given links to each one of them. So this one happens to be in graph.microsoft.com. So if you go to graph.microsoft.com, it gives information about pretty much some of the, everything related to all the services that are available, the SDKs that you can use to help integration much easier, some of the quick starts and samples, documentation. And the most interesting tool for me is the Graph Explorer, because with very basic knowledge of some of the services that are powering this and basic information about the REST API, you can build your knowledge on top of it. So that's sort of, if you want to think of a UI for Microsoft Graph, this website would be the right place to go. So,
does Dynamics integrate with Graph?
Not yet. I think that's in the works. And typically, the way we go about doing is there is a beta endpoint to all of this. So application tends to surface their APIs from beta, and then it promotes into the v1.0. I believe most of these services that you see, if it's not already there, it'll be in the roadmap.
Does the Graph has any functionality similar to Graph database? For example, using your example for with the contacts, if we have multiple contacts associated with each other, so we'll be able to analyze the proximities and, for example, applying some social network analysis So the graph is just a framework to retrieve the entities that are linked to each other.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So, I think what you're touching upon is sort of insights on top of the data, right? So there are some pre-canned insights that we provide, but the one that you're talking about, for instance, of all the contacts that my employees have, what kind of social network they have outside of the graph, outside of Office 365.
Internally, I mean, the graph itself.
Yeah, so that is something that you as a developer can build on top of it. You would need some form of an algorithm that helps match the data and provide that insight. The one key aspect of Microsoft Graph is gives you delta queries. For instance, let's say you scan all my contacts across all the employees one time and you can cache them, and then you can then go ask, give me only the deltas. So the very first query is going to be expensive for you. For going forward, all you need to do is more of an update on top of some form of mishmash that you created on top of the data. So specifically, we don't have that particular insight, but that's something that developers can create. So it's not a database which you can just do a large query and get only the specific subset of data. On a given entity, on a given query, you can do filters, and for relationships, you can go query and deeply nested information. But for more insights, there'll be more back-end processing logic that's needed that happens behind the scene. All right. So in the interest of time, I'll quickly move on to the second topic of this presentation. And like I mentioned before, this deck has all the things that I showed you, the docs, the Graph Explorer tool link. It has the React.js starter application link. There's also one for Angular, and then the bot framework that I just showcased. That is an open source project, so you can kind of use that as your base point or contribute to it. All right. So the next, I'm going to talk about the add-ins, which is sort of the second pillar of Excel extensibility, and how the work that we're doing relates to Excel. So I already mentioned Office add-ins have existed for a number of years. We've had VBA and COM technologies, XLL, and developers have been using these technologies for a number of years to create value-add services. Those will continue to exist. And what I'm highlighting here is more of extending the Office canvas using web technologies. The key aspect of this is that today, if you develop, say, a VBA solution, it works on Win32, and with a little bit more work, it'll work on Mac. But if you want to extend this to places where users are using Office, such as an iPad, maybe a browser session, the existing technologies that the VBA technology doesn't allow you to do that. So in order to address that, cross-platform is a really key critical aspect for us. So the web add-in provides you with support for cross-platform solutions. That helps you deploy your solutions across multiple endpoints where the users are working with their Office products. The third aspect of this is the distribution. So if you have a legacy solution, distribution is a huge challenge because there's no standardized way of doing it. Some people have customized it to their own environment, but if they want to kind of extend that to another customer, they have to kind of recreate that whole framework again. In order to solve this challenge, we created more of a modern distribution. So if all you need to focus on is, I'm going to create the core logic for my add-in, and I'm going to offload the distribution aspect of it to the framework itself. And I'll kind of showcase how that works. Sort of quickly, why add-ins, why web add-ins? One key aspect is the cross-platform nature of it. So you develop once, and then you can test and deploy across other platforms. You don't need to do platform-specific implementation. It allows you to, which is still in the preview or beta stage, the single sign-on. which is to integrate your add-in to Microsoft Graph that I'm talking about, that I just talked about. So you don't necessarily need Microsoft Graph for Office add-ins to work. You can do this in a standalone service. So if you happen to have an MSO license, Office add-ins will work fine. But more interesting scenarios are where you want to connect your add-ins to wealth of data that's already sitting in Microsoft Graph. So if I have signed in as Sudhi into an Excel, your add-in would be able to know that I'm part of Microsoft Graph and I have tons of data that's out there, and by getting the right set of permission, you can access my data on behalf of me just by getting the user to install the add-in for you. So that's a key benefit. And the other one is the centralized deployment that I talked about, which gives the administrator, if there's an Office 365 administrator, they can get an add-in directly from the store or from an ISV or a developer and distribute that to their employee base. It could be based on groups, or targeted, or universally available for all the employees. It can be also, can fine tune and say, I want user permission or I want admin permission on it. And the other aspect is you can monetize. So if you want to make your add-in available to external users, all of the Office users as a whole, you can put that in our Office store and monetize the service. And we're constantly adding new APIs. We don't have all the capabilities that the VBA technology offers today because we are starting. We started about 3 or 4 years ago, and we're building all the critical APIs that are needed. And then the last aspect I'll mention is that most of the developer community seems to enjoy and like working on the web technologies. So this is a nice extension. If you already have web development capabilities and experience, you can extend that to create Office add-ins. So when we think of an add-in, there are different command surfaces to it, or different surfaces where you can express it. One is the command ribbon, and then you can have a task pane add-in that sits on the side. You can have a model dialog, and that gives you sort of more focused interaction with the users. Or you can have a content add-in that sits within, let's say, a worksheet. It's more of an embedded structure, it's similar to a chart. I can have your website running inside of that. So really, what web add-ins allows you to do is for each of these interfaces where you can interact with the user, you can embed your web technologies as part of it. So really a way for enhancing the Office Canvas experience. And the APIs that we make available, it's basically a set of libraries. A library API that gives you access to the data structure. It allows you batch your instructions. If you have a set of instructions, you can batch and send it to Office. It's based on promise-based. It's asynchronous. That means it doesn't tie up your UI. It can do more complex operation behind the scene. More object-oriented in design. So if you're used to .NET environment, this is really convenient. And because this is web technology based, you need to be cautious about the performance aspects. So we allow you to only extract the push information that you're interested in. The other aspect is it's service compatible, which means it's very easy to access, make information available on your workbook to a remote server and vice versa. And I mentioned we are enhancing the API surface. So this is sort of state of where things stand. We have all the core objects. So the number that you see is the version number. We're currently at 1.6. All the green ones are APIs that are either being developed or already in beta. So we're investing to make the API surface more complete and more cohesive. And we already have a ton of partners who use this platform. So all of these add-ins are the ones that are running through the store, and there are more on-premise add-ins that is not shown here that developers develop for their own enterprise environment and deploy locally. And here's sort of a view into what's coming. So we have things like data validation, more charts and more events and UDF or custom functions, more data intensive operations such as giving pivot table access, slices and establishing data connectivity. So these are the things that that we're working on right now. They're either in early design or development stage, and all the things that you see here, we make them available through a GitHub repo, which means you can influence our roadmap. You can go look at an API design that we have and say, hey, here's the use case that I have. I'm missing these core APIs or scenarios. Can you add them? So these are all the things that we want to listen from you. So I have a screenshot of here that shows the open specification. It's in a GitHub branch. You can go and contribute to it. We can leave your feedback. So in order to get started, we have tool sets that help you. Scriptlab, which if time permits, I'm going to show you. If you used to Visual Studio, you can create a new project and select Office add-in. If you're a Node developer, we provide a human generator that bootstraps with a template and helps you build on top of it. And I mentioned acquisition and deployment. We have an Office store for acquiring the add-in. And in order to deploy the solution, here's the workflow. An add-in comes with a configuration file, which is basically an XML file. And you host your website on any cloud service. It could be an Azure or any other cloud provider that you have. But all you really need to do is to link that website or to your Office add-in. And that is done through a manifest file. And you can submit that to our store, similar to how you would submit an app to a mobile ecosystem. So we have an Office storefront that takes in that, validates, and makes it available to the store. You can also use Office 365. So here's a quick view of what that looks like. So here's the Office 365 Administrator Center. I can go and upload an add-in. And then search from a store, or I can give a URL to the manifest or just upload manually. And I can say, here's the add-in that I want all my legal team to look at. I can search here. Let's say I'm going to search for, oh, sorry. OK, I'll switch over, and I'll showcase that for deployment. Yeah, I think this is a good time. So, and I have links to help you get started. The next 2 minutes, I'm going to quickly show. Sorry, I'm running out of time here. So here's the admin center. So I went into Office 365 admin center, services and add-ins. I said, upload an add-in for me. It came back with this dialog. I said, I'll search for an add-in. And I can just add this, and I can assign the groups. I can say this is for everybody, a specific set of people, or only to an individual users. So what this allows the administrator to do is, it saves the configuration as part of the user profile. The next time I go to my, let's say I go to my OneDrive and I create a new Word document, that add-in that I just assigned as an administrator will show up on the user's front. So this may take a little bit of time because it uses the idle time to actually load it. So I'll come back to this, and I want to show how do you actually acquire from inside. So if you're in Excel, you can go to your Insert tab, click on the store. So this gives you access to the store. And here you can look at what's available through your administrator. You can also look at the store. In this case, it's bringing up the store website. And using the same interface that you saw, I can also query from within. So this is how a developer would, an individual user would go acquire. So I'm going to search for So I'm going to add this. So what it does is it loads that add-in, and it shows a simple dialog saying, hey, this add-in that you just acquired is ready for usage. So this is extending the ribbon to put a button out there. Now I can open up that add-in. In the remaining few seconds, I'm just going to show, just to give you a flavor of what this looks like. So this is an add-in created by Microsoft employees, just to kind of showcase how do you, find a core data transformation function and apply it within Excel. So here's an example of data that's out there. If you have, if you want to apply data transformation, for instance, I'm going to switch over here for this data that I've staged. You have date and time field in multiple different variations, but here's how you want to standardize. You may want to just give a little bit of information to the add-in so that the add-in can actually help kind of glean what you are trying to do. So I'm going to click on this data transformation button. It's going to come back and say, hey, here's what I found based on what you gave me an input in the column B. And when I hover over that, it's going to just kind of briefly show, if you apply this transformation, what the data is going to look like. So in that initial few seconds that I hovered over, what it's doing is it's reading information in both column A and a little bit of column B, and it's going and searching in the cloud function to retrieve the relevant information, the relevant functions, and it's just showing me what it can do. If I'm happy with it, I'm going to go ahead and apply, and it actually saved the data for me. So, so in order to kind of gain information, insights into the workbook and also push, it's using a library that we provide. So we call it in general Office.js. So it's basically an SDK that helps connect your web add-in, which behind the scene might be doing any number of things that your common website would do, and then it connects that back to your Excel workbook. So, so that kind of gives you a flavor of some of the capabilities that the platform offers. So I think I'm a little bit over time. I'm happy to stay back and answer any questions that you may have. And then quickly, I'm going to switch back for going forward. If you're interested in this, this deck has a ton of links that you can help get started with. We do monitor our Twitter feed. We announce using the same handle shown here. We have all the repos related to Office.js and the GitHub repo shown there. If you have any technical questions, to ask a question on Stack Overflow, just tag them with Office.js or Microsoft Graph. And personally, it's been a great experience. Thank you for this opportunity. You can reach me using the information shown here. So thank you for your participation. I'm happy to stay back and take any of your questions. Thank you.